Today is a special Shabbat, and there's that car I often offer, and the trip to Hawaii. For anybody who can tell me what Shabbat this is. I always offer these when I'm fairly sure nobody knows the answer, and if somebody does, I always equivocate and say and point out that I was lying.
Joking.
Anybody know?
Joking, not lying.
Well, Shabbat HaChodesh. Shabbat HaChodesh. Now, can anybody tell me what that? I won't.
Well, it's the word is holy there. So
No, Chodesh, not Kodesh. Chodesh.
oh, Kodesh.
Chodesh. Chodesh means month,
Oh.
and Ha Chodesh means this is the Shabbat before Nisan, the month of Nisan, and it's termed the month. This is the Shabbat of the month. So why is Nisan called?
I got it now.
Why is Shabbat called the month? I'm sorry. Why is Nisan called the month? And that's because there's this strange phenomenon in the Jewish calendar. We change the year on Rosh Hashanah, right? But Nisan is considered actually the beginning of the counting of the months, and that's because of Pesach. Because Pesach it's a way of indicating the importance of Pesach. Now, I would be really interested if I met the folks who made this determination, but I can drash on it. But one can drash and say anything one wants. So I can drash on it and say, like, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur have their considered importance in our calendar, of course. Those are the Yamim Noraim, the days of awe. But by putting Nisan as the first of the months, it's pointing out that Pesach has a kind of a competitive relationship with those in terms of importance. I've heard any number of people, and I include myself in it, that say that Pesach, because of its rituals, its depth, its ideas, its philosophy, are really, really important. That Pesach is to my mind equally important to Yom Kippur, let's say. Now I don't remember if it was with this group that I brought up Purim, where there's that saying that Yom Kippur wants to be like Purim, but that's less serious than this, and symbolically indicated as such because Nisan is considered the first of the months. Okay, so here's what we're going to do this morning. There's a special maftir indicated for today because it's a special Shabbat, and we're going to look at a piece of that maftir. But I think we did it. And I'll tell you what it is in a second. Maftir. Okay, anybody maftir? Maftir. Well, that's because we're a Reformed congregation and we don't read Torah on Shabbat. If we read Torah every Shabbat, you would know that maftir is the end of it's usually the end of the Torah reading, the last several verses at the end of the Torah reading that is actually connected, not in any way thematically or anything, but it's connected to the Haftarah. Now, if you can hear in maftir the fa ta ra, and you hear in Haftarah the fa ta ra, you can see that they're linguistically connected with each other. But sometimes, so the end of the Torah reading is called the maftir, and from that you go right into the Haftarah reading, none of which we do at Temple Bethel. So you can be excused for not recognizing this. But there are several Shabbatot across the year where the maftir is identified from a different book. So today, we're in the beginning of the book of Leviticus. And the maftir comes from the book of Exodus, and you'll see why. And you'll see why it's connected to the month of Nisan. I think I'm going to start. I have three texts I want us to look at. We probably won't finish them all. And I think for the time that we're in Leviticus. I'm going to stick with the major text that we're going to look at this morning, which is Ecclesiastes. whenever we get to the book of Leviticus and I look at the Torah portion and I say, do I want to spend an hour and a half, 2 hours on this text? I have the standard Reform rabbis version to the book of Leviticus. It's about sacrifice. It's about houses with infections, and you get the details of how to slaughter animals. There's only one Torah portion in the book of Leviticus, in my mind, that's really worth a deep investigation into, and that's Kedoshim. But I'm not going to be here that weekend. I'm going to be in the Holy Land with a very quick visit to my kid and friends and so forth. So Jason's got the service that night, and so that night he'll probably bring some mention of Kedoshim into the service. So I always find an alternate text of my own choosing, and what I'd like us to look at is Ecclesiastes, which is which we'll probably spend the bulk of the time on this morning. I want to give a taste of the maftir, and I have a Mishnah. I have a Mishnah, two selections from the Mishnah text Pesachim, which means Passovers. And I just want us to look at a little bit about what the Mishnah tells us about bidikat chametz, and I think that's what we'll start with. So bidikat chametz, anybody? Bidikat chametz means the search for chametz. And when do you do bidikat chametz? You do it the night before Passover. You've already punctiliously cleaned your house, and all the chametz is either removed or has been sold to a Gentile who will own it for 8 days and then give it back to you. It will automatically return to you after the 8th day, so that legally speaking, you don't own any chametz. So let's say you have a pantry full of all kinds of flowers. You're a baker. You have a pantry full of all kinds of flowers, and Ralph's was selling Ritz crackers by the carton at really cheap prices, and so you have cartons and cartons of Ritz crackers and pounds of flour, and it would amount to a hardship for you to dispose of all of those things before Passover. So the tradition developed a legal way of divesting yourself of that by selling it to a Gentile. And there's a standardized document called the shtar that you sign and the sellers and the buyer signs, which is a legal fiction. You know, the buyer will not go into your pantry full of flour and bake bread or steal it or eat your Ritz crackers. They understand that it's a legal fiction. The Jewish tradition is full of all kinds of legal fictions, this being an interesting one. And to my experience, every conservative rabbi has such a document, and anybody within his or her congregation who wishes to sign on comes into the office, makes a little signature, and come the onset of Pesach, they don't own their chametz until the end of Pesach. And then they rush to the pantry and they get the flour and they make pizza so that they can break the Passover fast. That's not a quick story. I'm sorry, but it's totally irrelevant. But forgive me. So we were living in Brookline, and we belonged to a group that would get together at the end of Pesach and eat pizza, because that's an easy way to break the Passover fast. You dig into some chametz. And one of the people who went to pick up the pizzas came to the house wherever we were having the celebration and said, the guy who owned the restaurant said, how come we're selling so many pizzas tonight? Like many Jewish people went to that pizza place to break the Passover fast. So we're gonna do a quick look at that. And if it inspires you to do like a spick and span steam cleaning of your houses and inspires you to sell your chametz, I will have done my job. So let me find the text.
I have a question.
Okay, just a second.
Well, I'm here. You can all sell it to me for 8 days. I'm good for it.
Hey, Sandy? Ed, it's really nice to see you. Sandy, I'm going to interrupt for a second. Ed and I have had an on again, off again, mostly off again correspondence over the years, but we've managed to keep in touch. And he was one of the many people who made a gift for me when I went on the mission to Israel before. And so I'm nice to see you. Nice to see you.
Yeah,
Like,
I'm gonna log out at 1:30 because I have someone out doing some work for me on Shabbat, and I have to take him home around 1:30.
well,
Next time I come will probably be in 2 weeks, and I'll be able to stay for the whole class. I'm
well,
very
we meet bi-weekly. We meet bi-weekly. So
bi-weekly. Well, perfect.
all right. So Sandy,
When you say sell, how much money is involved? And do you and
it's I don't know what it is. It's symbolic. It's not a lot.
like
Like
18
$2.
cents?
Pardon me?
Like 18 cents?
Well, yeah, like that. It's symbolic. It's not. It's
And
not.
and when he gives it back, the money stays with him, whatever.
Well, actually, you're asking a question I really don't know the answer for sure. I mean, there may not be any money involved. And Ruth, you're muted.
Ruth, you're muted.
Rabbi, you're right. There's no exchange of money. It's all symbolic. It's not an amount at all.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah.
Symbol.
So let me bring up this text. We're going to just spend a few minutes on it, but it gives us an opportunity to see just how detailed this thing can be, and how how detailed the Mishnah can be on it. We're only just Betsy.
So this is just something I've always wondered about. At our conservative shul in Greensboro, it's sold to the rabbi. What does she do with it?
I said that.
What does she do with it?
Hold on for just a second.
Like, I always thought it was odd that it gets sold to the rabbi.
No. It's not sold to the rabbi. The rabbi acts as your agent. And
Okay.
the rabbi has a relationship with some
It's
specific.
transmitted through the rabbi, as
That's
the
right.
rabbi
Okay.
said. There's a
That's right.
document that they sign, and it's all
Yeah.
symbolic.
Okay,
Not as
thank you
appropriate.
both.
Yeah, I mean, it could be the synagogue's custodian if the custodian is a Gentile. It could be anybody.
Yeah.
But the
Okay,
rabbi
got
has
it.
made some formal arrangement with a
It's
Gentile
just,
who
okay,
agrees to have.
that makes sense. Thank you both.
But I assume people are physically moving those Ritz crackers somewhere, right? I
Oh,
mean,
no. They just it's
No,
all
they
in
stay
place.
there.
It's all in place.
It's like gold. You buy gold. It doesn't go anywhere. It just sits there. You should start paying rent on it. That's all.
Yeah. Okay, so this is the very beginning of the Mishnah called Pesachim. On the evening of the 14th of the month of Nisan, so that's Nisan starts. Today's the 27th, so I don't know if Elul, if Adar is a 28 or 29-day month, but Nisan starts by Monday for sure. One searches for leavened bread in his home by candlelight. Any place into which one does not typically take leavened bread does not require a search, as it is unlikely that there is any leavened bread there. Now, before I continue, you'll see that certain words are bold-faced. That is the actual Mishnah text. What this text does is it inserts a commentary by I believe Steinsaltz, Adin Steinsaltz, which unpacks the meaning of it and makes it clearer. And it's mostly beneficial, I think, because Steinsaltz is very good at this, but it does kind of take away a little bit from us to be able to see the original text, but it does the benefit of unpacking it for us. So I'm going to start again. On the evening of the 14th, the month of Nisan, one searches for leavened bread in his home by candlelight. Any place into which one does not typically take leavened bread does not require a search, as it is unlikely that there is any leavened bread there. So, an Orthodox type rabbi might say, oh, how humanitarian is our tradition. You have to look real close, but, if in the attic, you never go up there and with a sandwich, you don't have to search up there. It's free of chametz. But every place else requires a very close inspection. And with regard to what the sages of previous generations meant when they said that one must search 2 rows of wine barrels in a cellar, that is a place into which one typically takes some leavened bread, the early Tanaim which are teachers in the early centuries after the destruction of the temple, are in dispute. Beit Shammai says that this is referring to the search of the first 2 rows across the entire cellar, and Beit Hillel says there is no need to search that extensively, as it is sufficient to search the 2 external rows, which are the upper ones. And then it says this dispute will be explained and illustrated in the Gemara, which you can bet your life goes on for pages and pages. Okay, first of all, Gemara. Just in case, just so we're all clear on what that is. The Talmud is a collection, is a combination of the relevant Mishnah, and then the commentaries that evolve over the century, literally over the centuries after the Gemara, the Mishnah is published, and that's called the Gemara. So the Talmud is Mishnah plus Gemara, and that's the Talmud. But we're not going to look at the Gemara's explanation. So you got a couple different things here that I think are interesting. One is kind of secondary, but important because it shows the legal, maybe philosophical differences between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. But it says, so you got to search by candlelight. Maybe if this were written last year, it would be searched by flashlight. But the idea is that as you're about to enter into Pesach, you do this final search to see to it that your house is as clean from chametz as possible, which of course leads to all kinds of drashes on the kind of deeper meaning of what the word chametz means. There are a couple of different pieces here, pretty clear. You search by candlelight only in the places in your home where chametz is likely to have been utilized. The living room where you eat a sandwich every night while you watch, while you stream television. Your office, your bedroom, the kitchen, obviously, the dining room, obviously, but not the attic where all you do is you put all your old clothes. And then apparently it was common in those centuries that you have a wine cellar, and the wine cellar is full of barrels, and they're in various rows. And Shammai says you gotta search 2 rows across the entire cellar. In other words, you gotta look at a significant number of the barrels of oil. And Hillel says, if you go down in the cellar and you got a ham sandwich and a couple crumbs fall out of the bread, you don't have to assume that way in the back there's chametz. You just got to do the first couple of rows. And in any event, the likelihood that you're going to find any crumbs down there is very small anyway. So you see, so Beit Shammai is reputed to usually be more machmir, more stern than Hillel. Hillel always tries to find the most liberal way of explaining a law, though both of them function within the strict halachic framework. Okay, let's look at one more. After conducting the search, one need not be concerned that perhaps a marten dragged leaven from house to house or from place to place, placing leaven in a house that was already searched. And if so, one need also be concerned that perhaps leaven might have been dragged from courtyard to courtyard or from city to city. In that case, there is no end to the matter, and it would be impossible to rely on any search for leaven. So this one says, this one understands that there is an impulse in certain people. We usually refer to them by the formal term anal retentive, who are so concerned about fulfilling the letter of the law that you might do a search on the evening of the 14th at, say, 8 p.m. And then at 10 p.m. you say, oh my God, maybe some wind blew some chametz into my house, or an animal ran through my house and dropped some chametz here and there, and I got to search again. And the Mishnah says, genug, because they spoke Yiddish back in those days. Genug, it's enough. You do your search, you did it authentically, and that's enough. And you don't need to do it anymore. So any questions? Because that's it. I just wanted to give you a taste of if you all know about Safaria at this point, so if you want to study this text on your own, just go to Safaria and you have the whole tractate Mishnah Pesachim at your disposal. And if you do that and you have any questions, please feel free to email me and I'll ignore them. Okay, any questions about this? Then if that's the case, let's turn to the Torah text.
I'm
Yeah.
going to bow out now. I'm
Okay.
really sad to go because I was looking forward to more of this, but I will see you in 2 weeks.
You're
If for
invited.
some reason I don't make it, I'll wish you all Chag Sameach, Pesach Sameach, and see you then.
Okay, really nice to see you, Ed. I hope you come back
Okay.
in a couple weeks.
Okay.
Sandy, question. Unmute, dear.
Does it only refer to bread made from wheat flour? Or does it also include people like me who are celiac and I can't have any wheat flour?
Noel, if we were studying this tractate more carefully, you would see in an upcoming Mishnah what matzah could be made of. Well, that's not the right answer. No, it's any chametz is not necessarily wheat. It's any product. It's really any bread product, even non-kosher for Passover matzah, that you might have eaten between last Passover and this Passover. So it could be any grain. So you can't escape it. You're as responsible as anybody else.
All right.
Betsy?
I just wanted to comment, never having looked at the mission on this, that it's to me surprisingly reasonable. I would have thought that it would have been more, I don't know, more stringent in its application, but it really shows the rabbis, I think, trying to make this work for people, because you could go nuts. I mean, we already go nuts if you take seriously cleaning your house and all of that, but this is surprisingly reasonable to me.
Just to stay with this for a second, in our Boston days, a certain firehouse, I believe it was in Brighton, Mass, would set up a couple barrels outside the firehouse and light a fire in them. And people from all over Boston would come with the results of supposedly with the results of this final search for chametz. So you come with a little bag of chametz, and you meet at the barrel and you throw it in, and that's ridding yourself of the final bit before Passover arrives. But let's look at the maftir. So just to contextualize this a bit, this is the break. This constitutes the break between the 9th plague and the 10th plague, which of course is the slaying of the firstborn. This serves two functions. The Torah occasionally likes to make these kind of breaks. They're sort of a way of either relieving the tension, awaiting the occurrence of the 10th plague in this case, or building the tension because you as the reader want to see what's going to happen. So God said, so the 9th plague has happened. I don't remember what the 9th plague is. I'm not going to look up. Does anybody remember? But the big one is the 10th plague. This is the one that finally gets the Israelites released. Vayomer Adonai al Moshe ve'el Aharon be'eretz Mitzrayim lemor. HaChodesh hazeh lachem rosh hachodashim rishon hu lachem lechodshei hashana. So this is the first thing, and I'd forgotten this even in my preparation. So this is where we get HaChodesh. God says to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, "This month shall mark for you the beginning of the months. It shall be the first of the months of the year for you." Speak to the community leadership of Israel and say that on the 10th of this month, each of them shall take a lamb to a family, a lamb to a household. But if the household is too small for a lamb, let it share one with a neighbor who dwells nearby in proportion to the number of persons. You shall contribute for the lamb according to what each household will eat. Your lamb shall be without blemish, a yearling male. You may take it from the sheep or from the goats. You keep watch over it until the 14th day of the month, and all the assembled congregations of the Israelites shall slaughter it at twilight. Now, this is, well, they shall take some of the blood and put it on the 2 doorposts and the lintel of the houses in which they are to eat it. They shall eat the flesh at the same night. They shall eat it roasted over the fire with unleavened bread with bitter herbs. I'm going to stop there for just a quick second and point out that this custom is imagined in the book of Exodus without the existence of a temple. This seems to be imagined that individual families or collections of families would engage in this ritual, but not in any particular place. Does that sound right from what we read? But then what happens when the temple is built, this ritual gets centralized in the temple. And and as many Jews as could would come to Jerusalem. Passover is one of the pilgrimage festivals, the other two being Shavuot and Sukkot, and engage in this ritual. But now it's controlled by the priesthood, by the priests in the temple. And since the Talmud obviously knows about the existence of the temple, because both the Mishnah itself, then the Talmud, then the Gemara, having been written well after the destruction of the temple, they have this long and very interesting description of this sacrificial system. If you're not familiar with this, it's like all the priests are suddenly, there's a profusion of priests in Israel. I don't know what proportion of the population were priests, but they weren't all on duty at the temple except on Pesach, because this becomes a major industry. And all the priests have to be around in order to facilitate this massive production of slaughter and roasting. And everybody, kind of like in this degree, would either come with or purchase in Jerusalem a lamb or a goat, according to their ability and according to the size of their family, and they might share it with other families. And then there's this long assembly line of going through the temple and slaughtering these animals and roasting these animals and giving the roasted animal back to the family or families, who would then go out onto the Temple Mount and eat it with matzah and maror, which I'll say something about in a second. And they would eat it while on their haunches, their loins girded, as the expression goes. And they would eat it hurriedly, as was the case in leaving the land of Egypt hurriedly. And that was how Pesach was celebrated until the destruction of the temple, and then the Jewish imagination of Yochanan ben Zakkai and his colleagues invented the Seder. So there was no Seder in the manner that we have it until after the destruction of the temple. And thus I point out to people every year, because I get some amusement out of it, the Last Supper, in which Jesus engaged, had this big supper, and there's this wonderful painting, and he's in this beautiful painting, could not have been a Seder. It was not a Seder because the institution did not exist until after the destruction of the temple. Now, what did happen was you and your family and a bunch of other folks might rent a room in a hotel, if there were such things as hotel-like things, and would have another meal, have a rather more relaxed, festive meal, but it wasn't a Seder. The Talmud's description of this is really interesting. I mean, it's not just a little gory. I mean, imagine thousands of lambs being slaughtered, at a time. And the blood, where's the blood go? The temple had channels that caught the blood, and the blood would be channeled out of the temple. And it's a world that we wouldn't tolerate. We let other people slaughter our animals for us. Now maror, these days maror is horseradish. If you're bold, you grind it yourself. You get a horseradish and grind it yourself. If you're a little less bold, you buy the white stuff in a jar. And if you're less bolder still, you buy the red stuff in a jar, because that's the least spicy. There weren't no such thing back in temple days. What constituted maror was rather a lettuce-like thing, like romaine lettuce or chervil, I think I read, something that had a bitterness to it, but not the heat that you associate with horseradish. This is in my imagination. I don't know that this is true, but I'm pretty sure it is. As Jews migrated around the world and to Eastern Europe, maror became horseradish and becomes indistinguishable from horseradish. Nobody puts a piece of romaine lettuce and says that's maror. On the other hand, there is on the Seder plate something called chazeret, and that's a lettuce leaf. And I never understood what that was, why that was there. It's the only symbol on the Seder plate I don't understand. All right, so any questions or comments? All right. There it is. They shall eat the flesh that same night. They shall eat it roasted over the fire with unleavened bread and with bitter herbs. Do not eat any of it raw or cooked any way with water, but roasted, head, legs, and entrails over the fire. You shall not leave any of it over until morning. If any of it is left until morning, you shall burn it, which is an interesting contradiction, right? You got to eat it all, but in case you don't eat it all, you can't eat any more, but you got to burn it in the morning. And this is how you shall eat it. This is what I described that took place in the temple. Your loins girded, your sandals on your feet, your staff in your hand, and you shall eat it hurriedly. It is a Passover offering to Yahweh. For that night I will go through the land of Egypt and strike down every male firstborn in the land of Egypt, both human and beast, and I will mete out punishment to all the gods of Egypt. I, Adonai. And the blood on the houses where you are staying shall be a sign for you. When I see the blood, I will pass over you, so that no plague will destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. This day shall be to you one of remembrance. You shall celebrate it as a festival to Adonai throughout the ages. You shall celebrate it as an institution for all time. So I want to give you the Hebrew here because it's got a word that I like. V'haya hayom hazeh lachem lezikaron v'chagotam oto chag l'Adonai. V'chagotem oto l'Adonai. So I made mention of this at synagogue last night when we were doing a kids version level of Passover. The word remembrance really becomes, to my mind, it has multiple meanings. Now, I got to say something real quick, because I will always refer to these biblical events, and especially the paradigmatic biblical events, as a part of our mythological history. And by this I mean two things. I mean the kind of modern Jewish view that there's very little actual history to be found in the Torah. There's very little of what the Torah teaches that's corroborated by any evidence that anything of the sort that the Torah tells us about actually happened. So it becomes myth. But the word myth, in the way that I'm using it, is not derogatory. It's not a derogatory term. It is instead, the understanding that these stories live within us. They inhabit us, and the more seriously we take them, the more important they are to the way we view the world, in the contemporary world. The more we view the contemporary world with these ideas in our head, the more Jewish is our conception of them. So it's not, so they retain, these stories retain absolute importance for us, even if we're not comfortable with the historicity of them. And there was one other thing I was and at the same time, zikaron, the memory of them, is always changed from year to year, from generation to generation, because the generational relationship to these paradigms change because history changed, and history changes us. The moment that the particular moment in which we bring these memories to mind are they intersect each other, and so the nature of the memory changes. So let's read a little bit more of this, and then we'll turn to Kohelet. "7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. On the very first day you shall remove leaven from your houses. For whoever eats leavened bread from the first day to the seventh day, that person shall be cut off from Israel." So that's the Hebrew Bible's severity, right? You get caught toasting Wonder Bread in the middle of Pesach. The authorities come and they see you buttering a piece of Wonder Bread. You're cut off from Israel. Now that all gets mitigated and considerably softened, but that's an example of the occasional harshness of the Torah's language. You shall see. Yeah, Betsy?
Okay, so that is, something that if you were reading the text, the person shall be cut off from Israel, that you might wonder, well, is that a temporary thing while you're, for the rest of Pesach? Is that for some period of time? Are you permanently, made to leave the community? So if you then looked at it seems to me that would be something the rabbis would want to be discussing. So do you know, like if we went back to the Mishnah, we went to the Talmud and looked at the Mishnah and the Gemara on this, is there a conversation about that?
Well, a good question. Well, one of those many that I can't answer, but I can say that in a text, namely the Hebrew Bible, that commands execution of people who are found to be gathering sticks on Shabbat, this is understood in its severest sense. But then to consult the rabbinic tradition, I don't have it in the back of I don't have it in my pocket.
Because that is what the rabbis are often doing, is mitigating it, right? It's, you don't want to really be throwing people out for momentary lapses, even if it's, significant holiday.
It's a very good question, and I'm going to give a lazy answer. This text from Sepharia, if you wanted to, you can consult the commentaries right away.
That's true. Okay.
Let's see let's see if we can get Rashi real quick.
What's that? That was Exodus 12.
You just got to click on it. You don't have to do anything more than that. I'm going to reduce you guys. Sorry, let's see. Yeah. All right, see, so Rashi doesn't even comment on that end of the text.
But if Rashi doesn't comment, it doesn't mean that there aren't other commentators who might pick it up, right?
That's right, but I'm not going to go. I mean,
that's fine.
Let's look at Ibn Ezra real quick, and then. I mean, I'm just skimming it, but they're all interested in you shall eat unleavened bread, with whatever that means. You shall, oh, we've actually already passed the maftir. The maftir just goes up to verse 12. So being good religious Jews, we'll stop there and we'll pick up this other text. So that was, I mean, my point in that was to show the maftir and the Mishnah, to give a little taste of the way the Mishnah begins to discuss the laws of Pesach. And then again, I'll repeat that I have hermeneutical problems with Leviticus. I'm personally not drawn into Leviticus enough to, in my view, afflict a 2-hour session on Leviticus to my students. So instead, I'm going to afflict a piece of the writings, the Ketuvim, which Kohelet, Ecclesiastes. Okay. Now, Ecclesiastes is one of the readings that we do across the year. It's the reading at the end of Sukkot. I mean, it's Shabbat. It's the Shabbat of Sukkot. You read Ecclesiastes. And by the way, the book that you read on the Shabbat of Pesach, anybody? Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs. Yeah, I know. Yeah, that's. I mean, I know that. I was just trying to remember what you read on Shavuot, and it's not coming to my head. But Ecclesiastes, which is a really good text. So the Jewish tradition ascribes authorship of Kohelet to Solomon. The Jewish tradition ascribes the authorship of 3 books to Solomon. The Song of Songs, Proverbs, and Kohelet, Ecclesiastes. So Song of Songs is said to have been written by Solomon in his youth. His testosterone was freely flowing, and he was no. You do read the 10 Commandments on Shavuot, but there's a book from the writings that you read on Shavuot, and it's not coming to my head. If you have a look at the Song of Songs, it is a love poem with certain, I mean, very strong erotic flavor to it. It's an eroticism that you can tolerate, right? It's not pornographic, but it is erotic. And for that reason, both elements of the Christian tradition and the Jewish tradition will interpret all of this as the love not between a man and a woman or between 2 people, but between God and Israel. So those kinds of terms can be attributed, to this divine human love relationship. Then Proverbs, what's that?
Isn't Shavuot Ruth?
Ruth, thank you. Exactly, Ruth. And then Proverbs, which is a fun book to look at, is full of these, little sayings that are very nice. And that's what Solomon wrote in his middle age when he was full of wisdom. And then Ecclesiastes, which starts off sounding really like a guy, like an old guy with having problems with his bunions. It's a curmudgeonly, there are curmudgeonly elements in it. Was written when Solomon was an old guy. Now, scholarship shows us that the language of the text and whatever else, you couldn't attribute, and the age of the text compared to when Solomon reigned could not be attributed to Solomon. Solomon, the last time I looked at this, Solomon is the first ruling king of Israel and the first person and the first era in the history of Israel for which we have solid archaeological evidence. And so Solomon, we're fairly certain that Solomon was a real person. And the last time I looked at this, and this knowledge may have come up since this was ever brought to my attention. Not even King David. We don't have any evidence about King David having been a real person. He probably was, but we can't know that with scientific accuracy. All right, so let's have a look. So, Divrei Kohelet ben David, Melech Yerushalayim. The words of Kohelet, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Okay, so that, of course, is one of the hints that one of the verses by which the tradition assumes that this was written by Kohelet, because it's Ben David, son of David. So what is Kohelet? What does the word Kohelet mean? Let's see. I had to reduce you so I could. Let's see, where are we here? There we go. I couldn't see your images because I had to reduce the Zoom screen before so I could see the full Mishnah, see the full text of. Oh, so I could see the commentary text. So you may have heard the word kahila, the word kahal, in Hebrew words kuf he lamed. These are all words that mean something about gathering or community, right? The kahila, there are synagogues called like Kehilat Yisrael. In fact, I know of at least one such synagogue, Kehilat Yisrael, the community of Israel. I'm not sure why it doesn't say Shlomo, and things I've read about this would indicate that it's uncertain how the king gets to be, the Shlomo gets turned into Kohelet, but there's only one son of David who was the king in Jerusalem, and that's Shlomo, that's Solomon. And he starts off right away, right? Hevel Havalim Amar Kohelet, Hevel Havalim Hakol Hevel. And they translate, these translators say, utter futility, says Kohelet, utter futility, all is futile. Alter says mere breath, all is mere breath, which may capture the image, may capture the meaning of the words a little better. What real value is there for a man in all the gains he makes beneath the sun? One generation goes, another comes, but the earth remains the same forever. The sun rises, the sun sets, and glides back to where it rises. Southward blowing, and I'm going to stop in a second. I want us to talk about this. Southward blowing, turning northward, ever turning blows the winds. On its rounds, the wind returns. All streams flow into the sea, yet the sea is never full. To the place from where they flow, the streams flow back again. All right. So we got to go back here. This does seem like the words of somebody who's a little tired of life and a little cynical about the way things are. So help me. What is Havel Havalim? Utter futility, utter futility, utter futility. He says it 3 times. What is he saying?
No meaning to life.
Say again.
No meaning to life.
Yeah. Anybody else?
Sounds very depressed.
He sounds depressed. Yeah. We of course don't know who the author is. We don't know what state of mind or physical state the author was in when he wrote this text, but it seems to be portraying the mindset of a person who is, and I hope I'm not prejudicing this, but it seems to be at the end of his life, her life. It's written by a man. All these biblical texts were written by men. It does seem to be at the end of his life, and looking back on life, he's kind of like maybe giving up.
Also sounds like he's abandoned God.
Maybe God doesn't come into the picture in the book until later on, but ultimately God does make an appearance, but here not so much.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, but it seems like if you had a strong faith in God, you would still find some meaning. So by implication, it feels like that to me.
Okay, anybody else?
And I just would add that in the next line about one generation goes and another comes, I guess, next two lines, but the earth remains the same forever. Where was he an optimist? I mean, I guess the ancient mind had no way of imagining how powerful people could become so that the earth could be destroyed. It seems naive looking at it.
Well, maybe, but maybe another way of looking at it, and you know, not necessarily the right way of looking at it, and certainly not necessarily what the author had in mind, is not that you know, we grow and become more powerful and have the potential for destruction, or have potential for, even before the atomic age, have potential for great destruction, or on the other hand, have a potential for vast increase in knowledge. I mean, consider in the last two generations, and I have to say ours especially, how exponentially knowledge has grown in a number of different ways. But he might see him. I read this. Hold on, Jason. I read this as saying, "Nicht gefährlich." Nicht gefährlich. It doesn't matter. Human nature, human existence, social life, politics, countries, are all ultimately the same. Which might make it more cynical still. Jason?
I was just thinking they would have been no strangers to volcanic eruptions and earthquakes and other things that do dramatically alter the earth, even in the areas they're in. You know, there were some pretty famous eruptions that caused quite a lot of change to the climate and change to, you know, the actual land and fertility of the land. And I mean, there were quite a lot that they were affected by. So this seems to be more just poetic license than actually really believing this as a truth, right?
Yeah, or again, my read of it, again, yeah, I'm not, you don't have to write this down in your notes and say this Cohen said it, so it must be the case. My read of it is a little different. Like, and I'm kind of repeating myself. It's not that conditions don't change. It's not that politics don't change. It's that it doesn't matter. It's ultimately all the same. You get to the end of your life and you look back and it's all just junk. Yeah, I mean, Judea, where this was probably written, is in an earthquake zone. So, you know, and there are frequent, very mild earthquakes that pass through that area. All streams flow into the sea, yet the sea is never full. To the place from which they flow, the streams flow back again. Help me, anybody? I see there are several comments in the chat, which
Those are old.
oh yeah, okay. Anybody?
I mean, maybe it's a metaphor, you know, all streams flow into the sea if the sea's never full. Like whatever you do, you know, whatever you never are filled up. You know, you're never satisfied yourself. You know, in your own life, things come, things go, but there's no sense of satisfaction or being filled by them.
Yeah. All streams flow into the sea, then the streams flow back again. It's cyclical and it's boring and it's continuous and it's without change. So in fact, let me get to the. I think I said, yeah, we read this verse. Only that shall happen which has happened. Only that occur which has occurred. There is nothing new beneath the sun. And that last phrase finds a lot of use in modern Hebrew. Ein chadash tachat hashamesh. There is nothing new under the sun. which was of course in the back of, which when we were talking a few verses back, was in the back of my head without my remembering it. There's nothing new beneath the sun. You know, earthquakes, AI, computers, atomic bombs, the Enlightenment, you know, the 18th century Enlightenment, democracy, communism, fascism, in vitro fertilization, jet planes, rockets to the moon, you know, satellites out into Mars and beyond. It's all of a piece. He seems to be saying it's all of a piece. There's nothing significantly different from all of those things that I just mentioned and so many more, that it's just the way things are, and it's utter futility. Betsy?
So I've always had trouble with that expression, there's nothing new under the sun, because especially as I've aged, part of me thinks that it's true. I mean, how many meetings, when you think back, have you gone to where the same things have been discussed and the same players, the same character types are at the table, and you know, you just, the same issues arise again and again and again. And so part of me sees the truth in it, but part of me also wants to resist it in the same way because of this attitude that comes through with it from Solomon. Part of me wants to resist it because I think it's a terrible way to live. And that letting yourself, as you age, not keep a belief that you haven't seen it all, and that there is hope, and there are new doors, and there are new ideas, and that, I mean, it's so depressing. You know, like you think of the Middle East, and you know, you kind of have to believe that somebody someday is going to come through with an idea that will make that system, that whole situation be resolved. To say, so I see both sides of it, and I find it a very conflicting statement. I can't say that it's true, beyond that it's true, period. I just think it's a bad way to live.
Jason?
I'm wondering if maybe we can try to draw a contrast between that which is possible in the earthly realm and that which is possible in the heavenly realm, and that perhaps it's to make us see that, you know, what's really got infinite possibility is the eternal life, and that the earthly life is somewhat, you know, sluggish and weighted down by our heavy bodies and the necessity to keep feeding ourselves and all of these things, and we live and we die. But what's really fascinating, you know, is this other thing. I mean, I don't know, it's just what I was thinking of as I was hearing this.
Wait, don't get all defensive on us. So it's an interesting answer, but and I'm going to push it a little bit. So when you say the heavenly realm, I got to ask you what you mean.
Well, I'm saying those who would believe in an afterlife and in an eternal soul would see that as the truth of our existence, and that our visit to the earthly realm is brief and unimportant in that larger scale. I guess maybe not unimportant, but brief and you know, less more a blip in our existences.
All right. I don't remember what I was reading recently. I'm having this kind of serious problem. I'm reading too many books at the same time, so I can't remember where I read this, where I was reminded about this. But let me bring up Maimonides, Moses Maimonides, who denigrates the body in favor of the mind, or the soul. You know, Maimonides would say the body is corrupt. It's inevitably corrupted, by which he means disintegrated. Body, you know, the body gets old and falls away, but the mind or the soul, and in the world that Maimonides occupied, it did have an eternal context to it, eternal idea of it, even if Maimonides himself never really articulated a doctrine of the afterlife. And so that's of a, I'm not saying that you need to revise your view, Jason, to conform to Maimonides, but it's of a piece, and it's of a piece that if you think of the body and the soul, the body and the mind as being possibly two separate components, Although there's a lot of philosophical discussion about the mind-body problem, but never mind for this purpose. That
I've heard it said, we are holy souls having a human experience is a way of framing
well, that's
what it is
nice.
that we're doing
That's nice.
here.
Do you know the origin of that?
I've heard it in Musar talks. I don't know who wrote it or who
Okay.
created the words.
Yeah, I like that. Say it again.
We are holy souls having a human experience.
Yeah. And so what does that say? It says, that's right. Our souls are in our body and they have to live through the body, and the body, for all kinds of reasons, does all kinds of unpleasant things that are unpleasant to the holy soul within us, and sometimes pleasant things to the holy soul within us. I like that. But this phrase, Ein Chadash Tachat Hashamash, is not the key to the whole book of Ecclesiastes. By no means. It's got 12 chapters. But this is the opening chapter. This is the opening gambit. And it's really, I love teaching it. I've taught this book a couple of times because it's so troubling to people who study it with me. It always gets the kind of reaction that we're getting. Betsy?
Well, I was just going to say that I really like what you said, Jason. I love that phrase. But I guess I'm so pragmatic in the way I look at Torah and all of these things that I don't worry too much about my soul, except as how I live my life. And so therefore, this idea of closing down the idea that you can't find in our own lives something hopeful and positive, to enable you to function in a way that gives you and others a good life is all I can see. So it just, I can't get off that point.
Yeah, but I'm not sure what you said, Betsy. And I don't, since we just got this little saying that Jason gave us, and not a fuller meaning of what it means. But what the heck, it's just Saturday morning with the Torah.
Well, I can try to expand some of how I understand it. The work that is taught, like in Musar, is that you could see that we're saying all the characteristics that anyone can have always existed in all people, and those will always be the same. And so, we can study honor today, and you can study honor again in 1,000 years, and it's still going to apply the same way to whichever humans are present. And there's also the idea, which I find kind of revolutionary if you twist it around in your head, that when we say we are created in God's image, and we say that God is an eternal being, then the image that we're created in is of that of an eternal being, not that we were created to look human because God looks human. And so therefore it's the eternalness of us that is our creation, and that God created us all as eternal beings in his image, which, changes the whole perspective of what it is to be a human being. And I'm not saying that any of this practically works for me either, Betsy. I can't, as I like to say, it's a wonderful idea to think of myself as having, an eternal soul, but I still have to pay the gas bill, I mean,
exactly right.
It doesn't change the reality of what I have to deal with on a regular basis. So it's, it's complicated for us. It's supposed to be. Would you want to know the truth? Really? Would you really? I think it's better to keep wrestling with it and trying to deal with it. Because I think our lives are richer because we're trying to figure all these things out, and we have all this opportunity to explore and try to understand it. I think if we had the true nature of our souls readily apparent to us, it would make everything we do here a lot less meaningful. I don't know.
Yeah, which reminds me of that old midrash. I have no idea where it's located, where it is in the literature. But there's this saying, there's this understanding that in utero we know everything. We know the whole Torah. But as we're being born, regardless of whether we're head first or any other way coming out, there's an angel waiting for us to pop out and gives us a whack right between our nose and our mouth, And that accounts for that little indentation that, and we forget everything. We forget everything as we're being born. And life is a process of recovering what we already knew. And so that's a piece of this. So paying your gas bill, for example, might have some more metaphysical ramifications than just making sure that your gas doesn't go off so you can cook your food every night or heat your house. Anyways, it's a nice little midrash.
I think if you knew all the answers and you knew the state of your soul, I think you might be among the psychotic. I'm not sure you could get through life.
All right, let's see. So, oh yeah, so there's more. I mean, there's more of this. Sometimes there's a phenomenon of which we say, look, this one is new. It occurred long since in ages that went by before us. And by the way, as we were talking, you know, I'm doing a lot of reading lately, as we probably all are, about AI, which I'm you know, has for those of us who are not scientifically inclined, snuck up on us, and is far more fantastic than if we haven't thought of it, we haven't read about it than we knew. So I'm thinking maybe I'll go to, was it Chat GBH or GBT, and I'll ask it to write about, is there anything anything new under the sun? Because of course what AI rather promises or threatens, depending on where you stand, is really, it's really a knowledge revolution. I haven't played with it yet, but
maybe that's where the Middle East solution lies, because maybe we haven't asked artificial intelligence to solve it for us yet.
then we got to listen to what it says. But I'm bringing it up because, you know, given its nature, it portends, or that's as a negative connotation, but it portends to be a greater revolution than the computer or jet planes, and maybe even atomic power. But it all happened. There's nothing new. It all happened before. The earlier ones are not remembered. So too those that will occur later will no more be remembered than those who occur than those that will occur at the very end. And then he's going to do a little bit of reflection here. So that too is kind of nasty, isn't it? Doesn't it seem? It seems to say, you know, I, even Kohelet, but we remember Kohelet if he is the real author of this thing. Even I, Kohelet, will ultimately be forgotten. You know, we're going to pass on, whether there's a next life or not, that's another story. And, you know, our kids will remember us. If we're lucky, our kids will remember us. And if we're luckier still, our grandchildren will remember us. But among our great-grandchildren or our great-great-grandchildren or society as a whole, you know, how will, you know, what will our life, what meaning will our life have had 50 years, a century after we've passed? And that kind of you know, we all have our ego, and I'm not saying that in, you know, the negative way. Oh, he's all ego, but you know, we have our ego. We have our sense of self. We have a very powerful sense of self that is so powerful that you know, it's hard to think about when that ego ceases, at least on this earth. When this ego ceases, the memory of it will begin to fade right away. I mean, you know, how many times have I done a eulogy where I've spoken at some length with the family and maybe have even known the deceased, and you try to capture the life of the deceased in, you know, 1,500 words, it's impossible. And even if at the funeral, you know, I've conducted funerals where, you know, many people have spoken, you know, and they remember this about the deceased, they remember that about the deceased. Even at that point, you cannot capture the life of the person. And even if you're such an interesting person that after your death, somebody wants to write a biography of you, even that can't capture the totality of you. The totality of you is gone the minute your heart stops beating and you stop breathing. And that's, you know, that's a sobering thought. And then whether Kohelet really meant what I'm saying by these words, it's what comes to mind. You know, I studied this text with a friend of mine whom I study with every week. We studied this a while ago, and I remember him, I'm getting this from him, actually. His name is Eitan Weg. And I remember him saying, this is kind of a sobering, if I remember what he said, it's a kind of sobering thought that, when I'm gone, I'm gone, and the memory of me is gone. Okay. Anything else? Do you all want to go now, take a long nap? Have several drinks and take a nap? Yeah, Jason.
In a more earthly realm, I tend to think of this is as long as somebody still remembers us, we're still here. So it's the extent, and I think about this sometime with like my grandfather, right? Like, he still lives on through my memories and his kids' memories, and to the extent that they still have my kids' memories. But my kids will have no memories of him. And so there's a point where you wonder, does his existence sort of fade out at that point, right? Somebody might have his name on a genealogy chart someday that they find, right? But no one who actually had any time or experience with him, eventually that passes. And that's kind of just how I've always thought about it, right? Is like, as long as we're still talking about him every year at his yard site, and and we still share memories and photos, he's still very much alive for all of us. And that's important, and I'm just picking one person, of course. But eventually, like, unless you are someone whose name is in the history books, they do stop talking about you, right? Most of us.
Yeah, yeah. And it's kind of sobering. Wendy, what's on your mind?
Well, I remember when we went to the King Tut exhibit, and they were talking about in King Tut's culture, if people remember your name, then you're still alive. And if we still know the name King Tut, then, he's still relevant. But it's not always like that everywhere, because I know that, like, in some of the Native American cultures, they don't want you to say their name. Like, I remember when they named Seattle after Chief Seattle, I remember learning that he didn't want that. He didn't want his name repeated after he died. So that is a different culture there as well with that, in that respect.
Yeah, it is kind of an interesting topic. It's kind of an interesting topic. And for someone like myself, part of whose profession is conducting funerals, well, I have a couple of different thoughts. I already said something about that, but then there's an ego part to this, and it's especially the case at a funeral where other people want to speak on behalf of the deceased. And in particular, if they're saying really glowing things about the deceased, which I mean, everybody to some degree or other will say glowing things about the deceased, otherwise they wouldn't want to speak on his or her behalf. And I'm sitting there thinking, and maybe you've had the same experience when you attended funerals. What are they going to say about me? What are my children or my granddaughter going to say about me after I'm gone? Or the spouse rarely speaks on behalf of the deceased. They're usually not really, they don't feel like they could do it. Or, my wife going to say about me, or if I have a friend wants, what are they going to say about you at your funeral? We're all going to have one. I hope I'm not giving anything away here. We're all going to have one. And what are they going to say about us?
When my grandfather died on my father's side, no one was sad and no one had anything good to say about him. And when the only one person who would speak was my uncle, who was his son-in-law, and the best he could say about him was he never really asked for anything. Like, whenever he would go visit him in the nursing home, he would just say, "Oh, you got a cigarette?" But he was not a good person. He was not a nice person, and nobody missed him, and no one was sad. And it was all very depressing just from that point of view.
Well, then there is that. I mean, what
Yeah.
are people going to say about me? Are they going to, and by me, I mean all of us. So is somebody going to stand up and say, he wasn't a good father. He wasn't a good spouse. He was a terrible rabbi, speaking for myself. You know, his writing, he was a terrible writer. Why did he try to write fiction? His stuff was terrible.
Right. And the rabbi tried to treat it like an object lesson, you know, if this is what your memorial is going to look like, if this is how you behave.
And
So,
Jason,
You know, not the grandfather I was speaking of before, but the other one on my mom's side, at his funeral, it was kind of an odd thing because the family didn't really speak. He had not really kept good relationships with much of the family. But all these people, none of us knew, came up and spoke glowingly about him.
yeah,
They'd had wonderful experiences, neighbors, people he had interacted with. He had this world that we didn't know, where he was very much admired and respected. And it was a fascinating thing to realize that we didn't really know his real life. You know, and that was kind of a sad thing to realize at someone's funeral.
wow, that's interesting. It's interesting. People have right. The people have multiple. They kind of live multiple lives. Reminds me of someone, but I won't bring it into the conversation. Yeah, there's that story, right? The rabbi stands up at the funeral of a guy and he says, you know, I don't really have anything I can say about this person. I don't have anything nice to say about this person. I'm wondering if anybody out there has anything to say. And somebody in the back of the room stands up and he says, his brother was worse. All right, let's so we good. I want to quit around 11:30 or so, but let's read a little bit more of this. So I, Kohelet, was king in Jerusalem over Israel. I set my mind to study and to probe with wisdom all that happens under the sun, an unhappy business that which God gave men to be concerned with. I observed all the happenings beneath the sun, and I found that all is futile and pursuit of wind. Hine hakol havel u'reut ruach. A twisted thing cannot be made straight. A lack cannot be made good. I said to myself, here I have grown richer and wiser than any that ruled over before me over Jerusalem, and my mind has zealously absorbed wisdom and learning. And so I set my mind to appraise wisdom and to appraise madness and folly. And I learned this too was pursuit of wind. For as wisdom grows, vexation grows. To increase learning is to increase heartache. So this has all been building up to this, right? The guy says, all right, you know, let me tell you who I am. And you know, and you know, Solomon is known for his wisdom, right? That wonderful story about the two women claiming the baby both to be theirs, and how the way Solomon cleverly is able to determine which is the real mother. And there's the dream that Solomon has before Dad's about to die, which I always use at least once in a congregation when I'm installing a new board, right? God comes to Solomon and says, you can have anything you want. And Solomon says, I want wisdom. And God says, well, I'll grant you wisdom. You could have asked for riches and power and so forth. I'll give you those too. So we know this about Solomon, and he builds the temple, and he builds it. You know, I'm not sure if it's in the Bible story or in Midrash, but he builds it without nails. The temple was built without metal, without using things that are also weapons of war. And now we learned, you know, oh yeah, I mean, I got a PhD in philosophy, I got a PhD in psychology, I got a PhD in 17th century British literature, and at the same time I studied Russian. And then I got a PhD in mathematics and in physics and in organic chemistry. I know all this stuff. Nicht gefährlich. You know, that should be the subtitle of this chapter. Nicht gefährlich. It just doesn't mean a darn thing. It's a pursuit of wind. Wisdom grows, vexation grows. To increase learning is to increase heartache.
Well, to some extent, you can see that because knowledge accumulate. You know, we all know that the more you know, the less you know. I mean, when you age, you can have all those degrees, and what you mostly really know is how little you know. So spending your life accumulating wisdom, I can see, does lead to the understanding that you still know very little. And maybe that's because we're not gods and we don't have you know, we are not given privy, as we were talking before, to things, you know, we can't know everything. And so that's what we know at the end of our lives, how little we know.
You know, my eye just caught something in verse 16. Here I have grown richer and wiser than any that ruled before me over Jerusalem. Well, it's not that great a line. A line of kings, right? It's just two kings. It's David and Saul. And Saul was a stunk. We know that about Saul. He was a shlab. And David spent his time, building the kingdom. And by the way, another, I'm sorry. The stories about David are among the most fascinating in the whole Hebrew Bible. So much so that Robert Alter collected all the stories and published them into one volume. It's something worth looking at. But you know, he's only comparing himself to David and Shaul, and it's not like he had the Henrys and the Williams and so on and the Elizabeths before him. But it makes it look like it's a long line that he's now the head of.
Maybe it's an anachronistic insertion later by the writer, you know,
Maybe.
thinking, you know, we've had many rulers over Jerusalem since, and so it got put in there.
Maybe. Although when someone says that, I always think of what David Sperling, one of my Bible teachers in rabbinical school, said about the idea of assuming you need to emend a text. He says, you got to consider all possibilities about the meaning of the text before you assume it's corrupt or inserted. So that's your assignment for 2 weeks from now, Jason. Figure out if logically it could be, and the word is interpolation. It's a nice word to know for the purposes of crossword puzzles, if this is interpolated into the text. All right, so is this okay? Should we? I hope what is the next chapter? No, I think it's chapter 3. That's the one that says, to everything there is a season, and time to every purpose. We'll meet again in 2 weeks for Bible. Next week we have a guest star, which was announced at services last night. Eric Sabar will be live on Zoom talking to us from Yerushalayim. He and I haven't consulted yet as to what he's going to talk about, but unless he wants to teach a text, which is his choice, I'm going to ask him to kind of give a personal but also somewhat descriptive description of his life in Jerusalem, especially since October 7th. So keep that in mind. We have a rabbinic candidate. We have rabbinic candidates coming for the next 3 weeks, which has apparently excused me from the Bima for 3 weeks in a row. So I'm going to take a long vacation into we're going to go to France, England, Germany, and Italy, and we'll be back in time for me to be on the Bima for the 4th week, at which point I'm going to go to Israel for about 6 days. So
on that subject, Rabbi, while we were here, I got a series of messages from the committee, and they're wondering if Saturday morning next weekend, while I presume Eric's going to be talking at this time, if you would have any concern about the guest rabbi having a small children's Saturday morning service at the temple. You don't have to answer now, but you should let Christine know either way. She might message you about it or talk to you tomorrow. But
yeah, I have not received such an email. It seems
no,
like
it's been going on in our little committee chat and during this session. So I figured I would just throw it out since it's timely to what we were just discussing.
Before I finalized this thing with Eric yesterday, I talked to Jory about it. I wasn't gonna cast a wider net as to say, it looks like his name is Rabbi Gershon. He's got this long Polish last name that I can't remember. Won't have any specific communal duties on Saturday morning. He might have individual meetings, and on that grounds, we agreed to proceed with Eric's visitation. I mean, I don't know. I'll talk to Christine about it as to what she has in mind.
Yeah, the idea would not be something that would likely be a conflicting set of things. It would just be something for the younger families to come with the kids, and which would be a different group. but again, you can discuss it. It came up, so I'm just.
Hey, well, let me take down the screen share. All right, well, that's all right. So well, so that's it for now. We'll continue with Kohelet until the book of Leviticus is behind us. And it's a really good book. If I urge you to take a look at it independently and see some stuff. All right, anything else before we call it a morning?
There's actually a little story that something you were saying a few minutes ago reminded me of, and I don't remember who it's told of, but a guy is on an airplane and he realizes he's sitting next to a famous astronaut, one of the ones who was actually on the moon, right? And he I just don't remember which one. And he wants to say something. He wants to say something, and finally he looks over and he realizes that this astronaut is reading a book, and he says, "What are you reading?" And he says, "It's a book about Portuguese art." And the guy says, "Why are you reading about Portuguese art?" And the astronaut says, "Because I don't know anything about it." And the guy thinks to himself, that's why he's an astronaut.
Yeah, it's very nice. That's very nice. Yeah, that's Bessie?
And I just wanted to say, as far as we've gone in Kohelet, I see a lot of truth in it. I see a lot of truth in it, but I also see that how one's attitude colors truth.
Yeah.
And I think it was Sandy in the beginning who said, he's depressed. And if you look at what he's saying through the eyes of someone who's depressed, it has a very, very negative tone to it. If you look at it through the eyes a little differently, there's truth there, but it doesn't close down, it doesn't close down your ability to continue to live in a positive way. So it's just really the impact of your emotional well-being on what truth, on what reality is.
Yeah. All right, well, Shabbat, on that tone, Shabbat Shalom, and start gathering all your chametz. I do not offer a shtar, although I've been asked to, and when I've been asked, I do, but you can be sure Rabbi Fuss has such a shtar. If you want to sell your chametz through him, I'm sure he'll be willing to accommodate you.
I just put it in a bin in the garage, and that's good enough for me.
All right. All right. Shabbat Shalom. Have a good day.
Shabbat shalom.
Bye.